The unchallenged tyrants. That Selveni dominion ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. For centuries, their fleets had crushed any resistance. Their technology was far superior to any known civilization, and their enemies had learned one painful lesson: never challenge the Selveni. From the moment their warships entered a system, surrender was the only option. If a species refused, their planets were reduced to ash. Their dominance was unquestioned, their power absolute. Admiral Zhalkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Wrath of Sel, a massive dreadnought that had led countless battles. Before him, the latest victims of the Dominion's expansion, a minor race called the Thalvar, pleaded for mercy. Their homeworld burned, their defenses shattered, and their leaders knelt before the might of the Selveni. Zhalkar watched with amusement. "This is always how it ends," he said, turning to his officers. "They fight, they fall, and they beg. It never changes." His officers chuckled, knowing their dominance was secure. The galaxy feared them. No species could match the power of the Selveni. At least that was what they believed. Then the alarms blared. "Admiral, unidentified vessel detected at the edge of the system," a lieutenant reported. Zhalkar frowned. Another fool trying to interfere. The sensor officer hesitated. "Sir, it doesn't match any known designs. Its energy signature is strange." Zhalkar waved a hand dismissively. "Send a warning. Tell them to identify themselves or be destroyed." Moments later, the communication officer turned pale. No response. "Sir." That was unusual. Most species knew better than to ignore the Selveni. Zhalkar's amusement turned to mild irritation. "Fire a warning shot. Show them what happens to those who defy us." The order was carried out instantly. A massive plasma bolt, powerful enough to vaporize a city, was launched from the dreadnought's main cannon. It roared across the void, a bright lance of destruction aimed directly at the unknown warship. But something unexpected happened. The plasma bolt vanished before it even touched the ship. No explosion, no impact, just nothing. The bridge fell silent. Zhalkar's amusement was gone. What just happened? The sensor officer frantically worked the controls. "Sir, I don't know. It just absorbed the shot." "Impossible." Zhalkar leaned forward, studying the massive view screen. The ship was still there, floating calmly in the distance. No visible shields, no damage, not even a flicker of power loss. And then, for the first time in his long career, Zhalkar felt something strange: uncertainty. This was not normal. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The bridge of the Wrath of Sel remained eerily silent as the officers processed what had just happened. A direct plasma strike, powerful enough to tear apart capital ships, had simply vanished before reaching its target. No explosion, no deflection, just pure, unexplainable nothingness. Admiral Zhalkar clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing at the mysterious warship that remained undisturbed in the distance. It did not maneuver, did not power weapons, did not even send a response. It merely existed, an immovable force, a silent challenge in the depths of space. "Recalibrate sensors," Zhalkar ordered, his voice sharper than before. "I want a full analysis of that ship." The sensor officer's fingers danced across the console, running every available scan, but the results made no sense. "Sir, we are detecting energy readings far beyond our scale. Its mass is fluctuating. One moment it appears as large as a dreadnought. The next, it's barely registering. It's as if it's shifting. Shifting." Zhalkar repeated, not liking the word. "Clarify." The officer swallowed hard. "It doesn't fit any known classification. It has no standard hull composition, no shield signatures we can recognize, and..." His voice trailed off as new data scrolled across his screen. His face paled. "Sir, it absorbed the energy from our attack." Zhalkar turned sharply. "What?" "I ran a secondary scan. The plasma bolt didn't disappear. It was drawn into the ship's structure and converted. The officer hesitated, almost as if he didn't believe his own words. "Sir, whatever this thing is, it feeds on energy." A cold weight settled in the admiral's chest. That was impossible. Energy weapons were the backbone of modern warfare. Plasma, ion cannons, even antimatter warheads. If this ship devoured energy instead of being damaged by it, then what in the void could destroy it? "Launch a full barrage," Zalkar snapped. "All weapons. I don't care how much power it takes. I want that thing gone." His officers hesitated for only a moment before acting. The Wrath of Sel, along with the rest of the Dominion fleet in the system, opened fire. Plasma beams, ion cannons, and kinetic rounds streaked through the void, a storm of destruction hurtling toward the unknown ship. The might of the Tselvanni, forged over centuries of conquest, rained down upon a single target. And yet, it remained unmoved. The barrage hit nothing. The weapons vanished before impact, dissolving like mist before a rising sun. Some shots curved away at the last second, as if reality itself was bending around the warship. Others simply ceased to exist. Zalkar's hands tightened into fists. This is not possible. But reality did not care what he believed. Then, for the first time, the unknown ship responded. It did not fire weapons. It did not deploy fighters. It did not even move. It simply activated. The darkness of space seemed to fold around it, bending as a deep, rumbling pulse echoed through the void. It was not sound, not something that could be heard in the vacuum of space. Yet every officer aboard the Wrath of Sel felt it, a vibration in their bones, a whisper in their minds, a presence. The ship's exterior, once silent and smooth, began to shift. Geometric patterns formed along its surface, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The energy it had absorbed was returning. Zalkar barely had time to react before the ship's presence expanded. And in that moment, the Tselvanni learned fear. The unnatural hum in the void deepened, a soundless vibration that reached into the bones of every Tselvanni officer aboard the Wrath of Sel. The mysterious warship had been still, silent, an unbreakable monolith in the void. But now, it awakened. Admiral Zalkar could feel it in the very air around him. He had fought countless wars, crushed rebellious species, and watched entire civilizations burn under his fleet's might. But nothing had ever made him feel this. Small. The unknown ship's hull shifted, the geometric lines along its surface glowing brighter, pulsing in a pattern too complex to be random. The warship was doing something. It was preparing. "Sir," the sensor officer stammered, sweat beading on his brow. I don't know what it's doing, but its energy readings are skyrocketing, off the charts. No system should be able to handle that level of power. It should be tearing itself apart." Zalkar wasn't sure if that would be a blessing or a curse. He forced himself to remain calm. "Can we detect any weapons charging?" The officer hesitated. "That's the problem. Sir, there's nothing. No plasma buildup, no railgun loading sequence, no missile locks, just raw energy surging through its structure." He gulped. "Sir, it feels like the ship itself is the weapon." Zalkar's blood ran cold. A sudden shockwave rippled outward from the alien ship. No fire, no explosion, just a silent pulse that washed over the Dominion fleet. Every ship caught in the wave flickered as power levels dipped, lights dimmed, and control panels glitched. "Sir, our shields just collapsed." Another officer yelled, panic creeping into his voice. "Power fluctuations across all systems. Some ships are reporting total energy drain. They are dead in the void." Zalkar felt a sharp twist in his gut. This wasn't an attack. This was something worse. The alien ship had touched them, stripped away their defenses with a mere glance of its power. It hadn't even fired. It was simply showing them the difference between humanity's might and their own. And the real horror, it still wasn't fighting back. This was a warning, a demonstration. Zalkar refused to accept it. Order all ships still operational to fall back. Regroup beyond the system. But before his words could even be relayed, the warship moved. For the first time, it turned its attention fully to the wrath of sail. The darkness around the ship bent, as if space itself recoiled from its presence. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in transmission, but in a pulse of sheer force, a presence that reached through the void and into the minds of every Selveni officer, whispering a message that shook them to their very souls. You have never known true power. Leave now, or be erased. The bridge of the wrath of Sel was a chaotic storm of alarms, flashing emergency lights, and officers scrambling to regain control over their failing systems. But no matter how many commands they issued, or how many fail-safe protocols they engaged, the reality remained the same. Their warships were powerless, their defenses were non-existent, and their engines, once the pride of the Selveni Dominion's navy, now sputtered like the dying embers of a once great fire, unable to push them even an inch away from the looming behemoth that had effortlessly crippled their entire fleet without firing a single shot. Admiral Zalkar, his usually sharp mind racing through every possible tactical maneuver, found himself gripping the command chair with enough force that his claws dug into the reinforced alloy, his mind unable to reconcile the sheer impossibility of what was happening before him. No warship, no matter how advanced, should be capable of draining the energy of an entire battle group with a single pulse. And yet, here they were, helpless, adrift in the void, like insects caught in the wake of a predator they had never before encountered, one that clearly saw them as nothing more than an inconvenience. The sensor officer, his voice trembling with barely contained fear, managed to stammer out a report, though it did little to ease the Admiral's growing dread. "Yes, sir. The energy readings from the human warship are still increasing exponentially, but there's still no indication of conventional weapon deployment. It's like the ship itself is becoming the weapon." The Admiral's mandibles twitched in frustration, his mind working desperately to formulate a response. But before he could even issue a command, a deep vibration resonated through the hull of the Wrath of Sel, sending an eerie shudder through every deck, causing officers and crew alike to freeze in place, their instincts screaming that something was about to happen, something beyond their comprehension, something that would alter the fate of the Selveni Dominion in ways they could not yet fathom. Then, in an instant, the darkness outside the viewport shifted, bending and warping as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled apart, and from the depths of that void, a presence emerged, not in the form of a fleet, not in the form of a weapon, but in the form of a single, overwhelming force that pressed down upon every living being in its path, an unspoken message carried in the weight of its sheer existence. They were nothing before it. Zalkar could feel it, as could every officer aboard his ship, as could every soldier within his now powerless fleet. The judgment of something far beyond their understanding, something that had already decided their fate, and yet, for reasons unknown, still chose to grant them a moment to realize the depth of their insignificance before the inevitable conclusion was reached. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the pressure shifted, not vanishing entirely, but coiling inward as if waiting for a single misstep, a single moment of defiance, a single act of arrogance that would justify the wrath that lay beneath its silent, unrelenting gaze. The silence that had fallen over the Selveni fleet was not one of calm, but of absolute terror, the kind that seeped into the bones and made even the most hardened warriors question their own existence, their own insignificance in the face of a force they could neither comprehend nor resist. And yet, despite the overwhelming fear clawing at their minds, despite the crushing realization that their fleet, the pride of the Dominion, had been rendered powerless without a single shot fired, there was still an instinctive, desperate need to act, to regain control, to do something, anything, that might shift the balance back in their favor, even if that possibility was nothing more than a delusion born of desperation. Admiral Zalkar, his claws still gripping the command chair with such force that they had begun to crack the reinforced alloy, forced himself to breathe, to push back the primal terror threatening to consume him, because even if the situation was beyond anything he had ever prepared for, even if every logical scenario had already spelled their doom, he was still Xelvanni, still a commander of the Dominion's navy, and it was his duty to fight until the last breath, no matter how impossible the battle before him might be. With great effort, he turned his gaze back to the main viewport, his multifaceted eyes locking onto the human warship, if such a word could even be used to describe the monstrosity that loomed before them, because this was no mere vessel, no construct of metal and engineering bound by the limits of conventional warfare, but something far beyond, something that should not exist, something that defied every law of physics and every understanding of military technology that Xelvanni had ever known, a vessel so massive, so impossibly dense, that even the void itself seemed to bend around it, as if space itself feared its presence. And then, without warning, the silence was shattered. A single pulse rippled outward from the human warship, not an explosion, not an energy discharge, not a weapon in any conventional sense, but something deeper, something more primal, something that struck not just at their systems, but at their very souls, and in that instant, that Xelvanni understood the true nature of the entity before them, not a warship, not an enemy fleet, not an opposing force in a battle they had prepared for, but a judge, an executioner, a being that had already decided their fate, and was merely allowing them to witness the moment their empire fell. Xalkar felt it deep within him, as did every Xelvanni in the fleet, the weight of history shifting, the unraveling of everything they had built, the undeniable truth that they had never been the dominant power they believed themselves to be, that their arrogance, their conquests, their belief in their own supremacy had blinded them to the existence of something far greater, something that had always been there, watching, waiting, and now, at this moment, choosing to reveal itself. The pulse grew stronger, the very fabric of space trembling in response, and Xalkar knew with absolute certainty that they were seconds away from annihilation, that whatever force had been unleashed was merely the beginning, that if the humans willed it, their entire species, their entire civilization, could be erased from existence with a thought. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pulse stopped, and for a single breath, a single heartbeat, the Admiral dared to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to survive, a chance to understand, a chance to. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the bridge, but it did not come through the communication systems, did not originate from any transmission or external signal, but rather emanated from the very core of their beings, as if it had bypassed the need for sound entirely and spoken directly to their minds, their essence, their very existence. You thought you knew power, but you have seen nothing. And in that moment, as the weight of those words settled upon them, Admiral Xalkar understood the horrifying truth. The humans had not come to fight. They had come to warn them. The moment the voice faded, an eerie silence took over the Xelvanni fleet, but it was not the silence of calm or relief. It was the silence of absolute, paralyzing dread, the kind that stripped away all illusions of power, the kind that made even the most battle-hardened warriors feel like mere insects standing in the shadow of a god, because for the first time in their existence, the Xelvanni, lords of conquest, masters of warfare, rulers of 1,000 broken worlds, understood what it meant to be powerless, to be nothing, to stand at the precipice of total annihilation, and realized that they had never truly understood the scale of the forces at play in this galaxy, that they had never been the apex predators they believed themselves to be, that they had always been prey in the eyes of something greater, something far beyond their comprehension, something that had merely chosen to reveal itself now, in this moment, as a lesson, as a warning, as a mercy. Admiral Xalkar's claws trembled against the armrests of his command chair, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, his mind struggling to process the enormity of what had just transpired, because everything had changed in the span of a few moments. And now, as he stared into the abyss of uncertainty, he found himself afraid in a way he had never known before, because this was not the fear of death, not the fear of battle, not the fear of defeat. This was something deeper, something that shook him to his very core, something that whispered of his own insignificance. Because if the humans possessed this kind of power, if they had warships that could bend space itself, that could shut down entire fleets without firing a single shot, that could speak directly into the minds of their enemies without the use of any known technology, then what else were they capable of? What else had they kept hidden? What else had they chosen not to use? And then the worst thought of all struck him, sinking into his mind like a venomous claw. If the humans were capable of this and had never used it before, it meant they had never needed to. A shudder ran through him, and he turned toward his bridge crew, expecting to see the same fear reflected in their eyes. But what he saw instead was worse, because his officers were no longer merely afraid. They were broken. Some had collapsed where they stood, their bodies trembling uncontrollably, their minds unable to process the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred, their spirits shattered beneath the weight of an enemy that defied all logic, all reason, all understanding of warfare itself. Others had simply gone still, their gazes hollow, their expressions devoid of thought, as if their very will to resist, to fight, to command, had been stripped from them in an instant, as if the mere presence of the human warship had robbed them of everything that had once defined them as warriors of the Dominion. Zalkar's throat tightened. He had commanded fleets against countless enemies, had fought in wars that had spanned entire star systems, had led conquests that had reduced entire civilizations to ash. And yet, never before had he seen his officers like this, had he seen his warriors, the elite of the Selveni Dominion, reduced to nothing more than hollow shells, not by battle, not by war, but by the simple, undeniable knowledge that they had already lost, that there was nothing they could do, nothing they could say, nothing they could even hope to attempt that would change the outcome of this encounter, that their fleet, the pride of the Dominion, was as meaningless to the humans as a single grain of dust drifting in the vast emptiness of space. And as that realization settled upon him like a suffocating weight, Zalkar finally understood the true horror of their situation. Because the humans had not destroyed them. The humans had let them live. And that meant something far worse than annihilation. It meant that Selveni were no longer the predators of the galaxy. They were the ones being studied. The void of space had never felt so suffocating. Admiral Zalkar sat frozen in his command chair, his body rigid, his claws gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal beneath them began to creak. He was not alone in his silence. His entire bridge crew, seasoned warriors who had once laughed in the face of death, now sat motionless, their faces drained of color, their eyes fixed upon the monstrous vessel that hung before them like an omen of doom. The human warship had not moved, had not fired a single shot, had not even spoken again since its last transmission. And yet, it had already won. Zalkar forced himself to breathe. His mind reeled, clawing desperately for a solution, a strategy, anything that could change the course of what had just transpired. But there was nothing. Nothing. The Selveni Dominion, a force that had ruled through fear and conquest for centuries, had just been rendered obsolete without so much as a battle. The humans had stripped them of their might, their pride, their confidence, all without lifting a single weapon. And that terrified him more than anything. He turned his gaze toward the looming structure before them, the human dreadnought. It was unlike any vessel he had ever encountered, unlike anything ever recorded in Dominion history. Its hull was blacker than the abyss itself, a structure so vast that his mind struggled to comprehend its full scale. It radiated power, but not the kind of power he was used to. Not brute force. Not the arrogance of a conqueror. No, the humans had no need for arrogance. Their power was something deeper, something more terrifying. Control. They had let the Selveni approach. They had allowed them to scan, to prepare for battle, to believe that they stood a chance. And then, in a single moment, they had taken everything away. The humans had chosen not to fight, because they did not need to. A shudder ran through the Admiral's body. What would have happened if the humans had wanted war? If they had unleashed whatever terrible technology they had hidden within that behemoth? Would the Dominion even have time to react? Would they have been wiped from existence before they could even fire a single shot? A deep primal part of him whispered the answer in the back of his mind. Yes. Zalkar's claws twitched. That Selvanni were warriors, conquerors, predators. They had spent generations crushing lesser species, enslaving worlds, building their empire upon the ruins of those who had dared to stand in their way. But this time, they were the ones standing in the path of something greater. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be prey. A sudden movement on the bridge snapped him out of his spiraling thoughts. One of his officers, a young tactical analyst, let out a choked gasp, his breath coming in ragged shudders as he struggled to form words. Admiral, our systems, our defenses, they're still down. His voice cracked with fear. We can't. Zalkar knew. He already knew. Their fleet was blind, deaf, and helpless before the human warship. Whatever the humans had done, whatever strange force they had unleashed, it was still holding their systems hostage. And yet, despite their complete and utter vulnerability, the humans had not attacked. No, they had sent only one message. A warning. Zalkar swallowed the lump in his throat. He knew what had to be done. There was only one choice now, only one way to ensure the survival of his people. He forced himself to stand, though his limbs trembled with the weight of the realization pressing down on him. He turned toward his communications officer. Send a transmission, he ordered, his voice hollow. The officer hesitated. To whom, Admiral? Zalkar's throat tightened. To the Dominion High Council. He exhaled sharply, his claws digging into his palms. Inform them that the Selvanni Dominion must never engage the humans in war. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. None dared to question him. None could, because they had all seen it. They had all felt the weight of their own insignificance. That Selvanni Dominion had prided itself on strength, on its ability to dominate the weak and erase those who stood in its way. But now, for the first time in its history, it had encountered something that could erase them. And the humans had chosen mercy. But Zalkar understood the truth. Mercy was not weakness. Mercy was a choice. And if the Selvanni Dominion ever made the mistake of underestimating that choice again, there would be no mercy next time.